Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vidaurri Mendez. I'm the director of the Center for Global Business, and I'm delighted to see all of you, and I couldn't be more excited to have the guest speaker we have for you this evening. Marissa Vidaurri is she's a wonderful catch for us, not only because she's a member of our board of directors at the Center for Global Business, but also an important and vital figure in the global economy today, but because also her company is engaged in a merger. So she is in the thick of it, and it's really a testament to her commitment and also ability to be lots of places at the same time. That she's able to be here with us. So we're really grateful for that. I'm going to mainly let Marissa introduce herself, but I will mention that as Vice President of Investor Relations at NI, Marissa is the primary interface between NI and its investors. Her job is to communicate NI's strategy and financial results and establish credibility with analysts and current and potential shareholders. So that's a big job. She has nearly 20 years of global finance and communications experience, and we're going to hear more about her background from her. Marissa, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to this discussion. Vidaurri, you did a great job of intro. I'll just add a little bit more color. I am a UT grad and actually grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas. I've been in Austin since '96. I'm a proud mother to a 13-year-old son named Luke. And if you've looked at my LinkedIn, I've really spent the majority of my career at NI. So I graduated and I was the first business that I worked at. I don't think you see that a lot these days. I think many people move around. But I think that shows loyalty. And I can honestly say we've been a company for more than 40 years. In my career, I feel like I'm working at a very different company today than I was under our sitting founder pre-2017. So this business has given me not only a lot of skills, but they're a great company to work for. And I work with some really great people. And it's just as many times as I've been approached for new opportunities, that was just really hard to leave this company. And so, as you mentioned, I think the most unique experience is the merger and the strategic review that we've been in for the last year. And we'll get into that more later, but that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you so much. And this is an exciting time, not just because it's an exciting time whenever a company is undergoing a merger, but to be able to talk to the VP of Investor Relations at such a time is a rare privilege. So I'd like to say that we planned it all. Mainly it was lucky timing on our part, but here we are and we're grateful. So Marissa, I would like you to talk a little bit about the field, because not everyone is familiar with IR. Actually, investor relations is a relatively recent field and one that has grown in importance, I would say, very rapidly in the last couple of decades. So can you tell us a little bit about your career and how you ended up there, particularly since that's not where you started at NI?
Yeah, when I started, great question. When I started at NI, I actually started in the marketing department. My background is communications and business, and I like to say I'm actually using both of those degrees in the job that I do today. And what happened was I was actually poached at a time where the investor relations leader was leaving, and they thought I would be a really great fit. And I jumped at the opportunity for many reasons. And I'll start by talking about the function. It is a critical role for all public companies. So companies listed on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. Private companies would not have an investor relations leader. And the reason it's important for a public company is investors are a critical stakeholder for public companies. They have fiduciary duties to their clients. They choose to invest in national instruments, we're now called NI. as many, other peers in our industry as well. So we have a duty to the investor community to really be transparent in our strategy, in our financial performance, and they're owed some answers when the company's not performing. And what I love about the role, and the reason I jumped at it is so critical to stay up to speed on the strategy of the company. Investor relations is, for 90% of companies out there, big and small, a very small team. It's me as the vice president. I have an investor relations analyst really focused on kind of the financials and reporting and analysis. And then there's some administrative support as well, because we do a lot of travel to conferences. That's really how we meet with investors, is we go to conferences, or we do what we call non-deal roadshows, where we have a little bit more control over the city that we visit and the investors that we meet. So with such a small team, what I love about it is the cross-functional nature of investor relations. I have very strong relationships with all of the key leaders. My direct partnerships are really with the CEO and the CFO. So it's a trifecta. It's the three of us really staying up to speed on the investment community, their concerns, their questions, what are they really wanting to understand more about the business. I do a lot of the ownership of the message and the narrative that we share with this particular audience. And so having that credibility internally, and what some people call gravitas, to really handle yourself in a room with those strong leaders, is really critical and important. And aside from the strong relationships internally, I really have elevated the program at NI. There is very strong understanding that the stronger I can be in my role, the more I need to understand about the business. When I get on a call with investors, and I take 90% of the calls, I'd say, 10 to 15% make it up to the CEO or the CFO. My job is really to be the front lines to investors. So when I get on a call, I have to be ready to answer anything from financials to strategy to competition to customers to where are we spending our R&D. So I really stay abreast to the company, and I've earned a seat at the table for many of our corporate meetings, which I'm really proud of. And then it's a critical role in that I'm the voice for investors. So I like to say I'm a relationship builder. I have credibility and trust internally with my leadership and my stakeholders, but even more so with the investors and what we call our financial analysts who cover the business. They come to me with questions, and they have to trust that I'm going to be able to answer those questions. In turn, they trust that when they tell me concerns or they share their perspective on the business, that I'm going to elevate that up to leadership and their voice is going to be heard. That was a critical role in the strategic review, which I won't get into so much right now, but that's what I really love about it. And that's why I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm a strong communicator. I really love to roll up my sleeves and understand the business. And again, having that seat at the table with leadership is something that really gets me out of bed every day.
It sounds like such an exciting position, but it's not one that always existed really in the past. I think in the distant past, it would have been it would have been the CEO and probably the marketing director, right? The VP of marketing, who would have been communicating those things. So why is it increasingly important for companies to have IR specialists on their staff? So you've talked about some of your primary functions, but at NI, but just thinking a little bit more broadly about the field in general, why is that an increasingly important position for global companies?
Yeah, I think it's important for several reasons. Having an investor relations professional or leader really sets the company apart. I mean, when I think of my role and what I do on the day-to-day, again, I have to understand the finances. I have to understand the global footprint of the business. We're in 3 different regions, the US, EMEA, and APAC. We're a company of over 7,000 employees with the revenue of 1.7 billion, and we sell to 35,000 unique logos. So we're a pretty big company and have to stay up to speed on industry trends and what's going on in the market. There was a time when I started in investor relations where the VP of marketing did play a heavy role in communicating with investors. I think as the trend evolved over time, I think there was an understanding that it wasn't just marketing or selling the company. It was, how do we trust a leader like an IRO, investor relations officer? When you put somebody maybe focused on marketing, they're seen as the marketing person. They're seen as, I hate to use these words, but marketing fluff. Investors don't like that. And I've actually heard that several times. They want to really talk to somebody who's transparent and trusting on the overarching business. And unfortunately, when you have a title like marketing, it gives the perception, which is not always true, that you have a smaller understanding of the business or you're really niche in your area. So I think that's part of it. I think over time, the role has become more critical and more important. I would say the pandemic was a great example of that. When the pandemic happened, I think this need for being able to communicate to the investment community at a time where we needed to be very, start doing things different, I think that even elevated the role more so. We did our first virtual investor conference. So we hold an investor conference every year. We invite investors, we would do it in person. They would see our products, they would hear from our leaders, they would understand the long-term financial plan of record and where the company was really going. And with the pandemic, you couldn't do any of that in person. So we did our first virtual investor conference, which was hugely successful. And I played a heavy hand in writing all of that content and really telling the leaders, here, you're going to be a speaker. Here's how you fit into the bigger narrative. And here's 80% of what I need you to say and 20% making it your own. So the pandemic really offered even more opportunity to see how critical the role is of an investor relations leader.
Okay, well, that helped a lot. Thank you. For those of us who are not as familiar with IR, I think that's a great lead into my next question, which has to do with the fact that NI is a global company, and obviously this audience has assembled to hear what you have to say about that global aspect. So, what aspects of global operations are challenging for IR professionals? So what about the fact that you work in multiple geographies and you are assessing investor priorities, and some of those investors are located outside the US, right? Obviously.
Right.
And you're talking about your operations within and outside the US. And then you're working to convey your value proposition to all those investors.
Yes, we are a global company. So I like to say it this way. When you think of investor relations, I think a lot of people naturally believe, oh, investors just want to talk about the finances of the business. That's all they want to talk about. That's actually not true. We, as a public company, are required to do lots of filings with the SEC. We do an earnings release every quarter. We host a call with the investment community where we talk about the business in that quarter, and we do kind of future-looking estimates. The financials are the easy part. They can go and read that. What investors really want to know is what is impacting those results. And so when a company is performing really well, investors are happy and the questions are much easier. When a company is not performing as we expect, things get a whole lot harder. My job gets a lot harder on those phone calls. And that's where they really want to dig in to exactly what you're saying is what's going on globally in these three regions that you're a part of. So it's very important. And I spend a lot of time with the sales leaders and our BU general managers to understand and get ahead of what is going on in the region. I will say supply chain was the big headwind for us over the last couple of years. We couldn't get our hands on components. Components got really expensive and they were limited, and that really impacted our financial results. And so that became the story or the narrative of explain to me the supply chain challenges in the US as compared to APAC, as compared to EMEA. And things loosened up and stabilized at different times in those regions. Another way that we have to really understand the global business is customers are different in each one of the regions. So what's going on with the customers? Transportation in Germany looks very different than transportation here in the US. So it's staying up to speed on the industries that are impacting each one of those regions. And we sell to various industries. We focus on semiconductor, transportation, air defense, and government. Then we have a very broad-based business, which sells across all of those regions. So when things aren't going well, and our performance maybe isn't as what investors expect, guess what? I have to really dig in to what the color is for each one of those regions and what went well, what didn't go well. You can attach it to our revenue and our R&D investment. Investors want to know if we're spending so much on R&D, which we pride ourselves on because we're a company of innovation. They want to know, what products are you spending that R&D on, and where are they being the most successful? Again, all of that regional color is very important. And it's something, I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of global experience when I started in NI. I had to learn it on the job. Looking back, if I had had more global experience coming into the role, I would have had a much stronger foot forward and how to analyze the business and how to create those messages and that transparency to what's going on in all of the regions. But I would say it's customers, it's industry. What are the headwinds out of our control, and what are the things that are in our control? A good example of that is our investment in R&D and making sure that we're getting a return either in one region or across the regions. And then the last thing I'll say is the balance of the regions as well. The good thing for us is when we're in those three regions, when they're all performing well, that's fantastic for the business. It's rare that they're all underperforming. So it's nice to have that balance where maybe it's the US is really strong, EMEA is, maybe more moderate, and it's APAC that's maybe in a decline. That makes the story a little bit easier and easier to digest from an investor perspective. And then making sure that as a business, we are relating ourselves and identifying with other companies in our industry. Companies like a Keysight or a Teradyne or a Fortive are the ones that I monitor most often. And that is helpful for investors because we're what we call a tree in the forest. A lot of times these headwinds that are impacting NI aren't just impacting us, they're impacting the entire industry. So that really helps investors to understand what's going on. Again, what's out of our control, but having to pivot and having to mitigate. If there's something impacting negatively to performance, as a leadership team and as a business, it is up to us to make some changes in the strategy to make sure we're offsetting that headwind.
Super. So I think most of our audience is going to be familiar with NI, but if you don't mind, can you give an example maybe of a product or a group of products that were affected maybe by supply chain issues in one geography more than another, and then sort of how you piece the story together? We'll talk about the pandemic so that I'm not asking you to reveal anything that might be confidential, but just sort of in the past, how did you manage all that?
Yeah, let me start with giving a little bit of insight for those that aren't familiar with NI of what we do and what we sell. So, and this is a lot of what I do with new investors, honestly, is tell the story and what we call, the investor pitch of why they should be interested in our business. But we're a company that sells software and hardware to engineers and scientists, and it's all for testing of various products. So, for example, a car, a refrigerator, your cell phone, you name it, we're probably testing it. We're probably a component in some way, either from a software or a hardware. And it's all about automating your data. So think about testing an EV for transportation. There's so much data and so many things that you have to test in parallel. Our product and our platform really allows people to automate that process and get their hands on so much data that at the end makes that car even safer because there's been so much testing that's happened before it hits the market. That's just an example. But with that is a very vast amount of products that we sell, as you said, into semiconductor, into aero defense and government, and into transportation. I'll start with aero defense and government. What's great about that piece of our business is defense spend has been really strong. So we've been able to capitalize on those government contracts. And when you're spec'd into a government contract, that's a really long-term opportunity for revenue. They're not changing their technology year on year. So the more we can win those contracts, the more positive impact it is to our revenue. From a semiconductor standpoint, that's really where we saw the most impact from the supply chain. It was really hard for us to get our hands on a lot of those chips So we saw a decline in semiconductor, all not material. We shared that when it was happening. And then the natural shift in 5G is a great example. 5G is a secular type of destiny or journey to get to the end. And so we had competitors who were doing really well in early R&D, and they were seeing a lot of revenue, and investors wanted to understand, why is NI not seeing that same level of revenue? Well, we had to explain that early R&D, and I'm getting a little technical for people, you're testing one chip at a time. So that's exactly what the competitors do. But as I said, as we automate mass amounts of data, our success came later in the cycle, because that's when they were testing mass amounts of chips and needed that high level of data. And so again, it's making sure that that story is being told, that investors don't see it as a missed opportunity. It's just, we haven't hit our part in that secular for, 5G is a great example. That's where I say the narrative is really important, and making sure you're leading the breadcrumbs to what does the cycle really mean? What does NI do for those customers? And where is our time going to come? A place where, from a regional standpoint, that we saw some pain was more on the transportation side. So a few years ago during the pandemic, we were more heavily weighted into testing of automobiles, and automobile production took a turn on the decline, and we saw a huge impact to our revenue for transportation, a lot of that heavily in Germany, which would make complete sense from a regional standpoint. What we did over the last few years is we saw the revenue opportunity from an EV, electric vehicle, coming through. And so we did several acquisitions over the last few years. We acquired expertise and technology that was going to allow us to be a leader in this space. And so what we saw happen was, in the pandemic, when the automobile production was a huge amount of revenue, today EV and ADAS is more than 50% of revenue. So if we ever see a slowdown in automobile production in the future in that region or others, it's less impact to the business, because we've really increased this revenue in what we believe to be a highly innovative area that's not going away anytime soon. If anything, more money is going to be invested in the EV space. So that's an example of how my mind needs to work when I'm communicating with investors. It's from a regional standpoint, where are we investing? Where are the customers strongest in these three business units? And then I need to investors when things aren't performing well in that particular region. And a lot of times that's a conversation with our key sales leader to really understand that. Or, as I said, we have GMs for each one of our businesses, and I can sit down with any of them at any time to make sure that I understand what's going on, so I can, again, be credible and transparent in what that story is and how I answer to the investment community.
Wow. So in addition to knowing so much about the business and knowing about your business in different geographies, you also really need to understand that geography, the decisions, I would imagine, the regulatory, governmental decisions, the economics that might be playing a role there, that don't necessarily have anything to do specifically with the pandemic or your industry, but might be coming from somewhere else. So you've got to be doing a lot of different kinds of research at the same time, I would imagine.
That's exactly right. Now, for our business, if you look at the revenue breakdown across those three regions, it's about 30, 30, 30, if you look at it, give or take. But it wasn't always like that. Over time, there was one region that was larger, and through the years, we've gotten it to be more balanced from a revenue perspective. But as much as I spend my time internally understanding the business, understanding where we're going from a strategy, and then the financial performance, I spend just as much time reading external market research on what's going on in the industries, what's going on with GDP, what's going on with the Purchaser Manager Index, what we call PMI. All of those external factors are ways that we can guide investors and really guide our company for what is going to happen from an economic perspective. PMI is a great example of that. We found pre-2017, a lot of our revenue came from the broad-based business. And we were really impacted by the PMI. And we would say if PMI was under 50 in contraction, we were going to see a negative impact to the business overall. If the PMI was over 50, that meant healthy, and it meant that we were probably going to see some positive in terms of our revenue performance. What we've done since 2017 is elevated the business units that I referenced. we've seen so much success in revenue for those 3 business units that our broad base maintained, but because the other 3 grew so much, our broad basis is now only 30% of overall revenue. That means that the PMI is still an indicator, but it's an indicator only for 30% of our business. Investors really like that because they felt that PMI was really driving the business, and how much control did we really have over performance? Well, we showed the investment community that we actually do have more control now because we're doing high level investments and attaching to trends like 5G, EV, the government contracts for these other 3 business units. And we're still monitoring, and still, again, the broad-based business is still a significant amount of revenue, but we're not as heavily impacted from the PMI. So again, staying abreast to the economics and what's happening in the market is important as much as it is the trends that we're investing in. And then again, I spend a lot of my time not just monitoring our performance, but monitoring the performance of our competition. So when I say a Keysight or a Fortive or a Teradyne, guess what? I'm listening to their earnings calls. I'm listening to their investor conferences. I'm hearing what new products they have out in the market, because that's exactly what an investor is doing. They're not looking at NI in a vacuum. They're looking at NI in relation to all of those other companies in the business. So it's important for me to understand that. And then lastly is, from a revenue perspective, keeping up to speed on some of our top customers, the ones that can really swing the revenue one way or the other. It's important for me to understand those partnerships and those roadmaps of technology and partnership, again, to make sure that I stay credible.
Marissa, what are you seeing? We hear so much now about activist investors and, investors who kind of want to take companies to task for their performance in this or that area, some of which may have to do with bottom line results and tools, and others which don't. So how do you navigate that, and where are you seeing it? I know one of our members of our audience was saying that we hear a lot about the environment, so I'll ask you about that. But also they were saying we hear a lot about the environment. What about the social aspects? What about responsible hiring and promotion and all of that? So can you speak to that piece of it?
Yeah, those are 2 phenomenal topics. So I'm going to start with the activism first. I spend a lot of my time with bankers. So banker relationships are really important. Activists, our thought at NI is the stronger we perform and the stronger we are as a business, the less attractive we're going to be to an activist, because we're performing and we're doing what we say we're going to do. When the company or any company is underperforming from a profit standpoint or a revenue standpoint, which are the 2 main metrics that investors care about, aside from gross margins, which are really high for us, that's when activists come in, because they feel like they can come in, make the changes that maybe the investment community wants, and have the company perform. So when the stock is underperforming in the market, an activist will come in. A lot of times, an activist will come in and tell a company to do things that they're already doing, but get them to do them faster, and then take the credit that, hey, we came in and actually made this change for the business, and that's why their stock is performing $10 higher than it was before. So an activist really, in my mind, comes in to influence change, and influence change very rapidly. We'll get into the strategic review and the Emerson later. That's something I definitely want to talk about, but that wasn't an activist situation. But the reason I meet with the bankers so often, and I did it on, proactively on my own, is I wanted to understand the activism landscape. What companies are they looking at? Why are they going after companies? What are our vulnerabilities? So many of the bankers did a whole assessment on NI, and our vulnerability really at the time, a few years ago, was our profit wasn't as high as our competition. We weren't doing share buybacks as frequently as our competition, and our revenue was kind of stale. Again, that's the elevation of business units, and really owning the control of revenue was important. Then the stock was underperforming. So, and there was a longer list of vulnerabilities, but those are really the things that were read. The reason it's important to partner with the bankers and get that information is because that's really what we can use to influence strategy. What can we do to overcome some of those vulnerabilities? And that's really how you can handle the activism. You can't prevent somebody from coming in, but you can control the performance of the company and the strategy. And the more we understand those vulnerabilities, the more we can make those changes on our own, and we don't need an activist to come in and do it for us. From a social responsibility, you'll hear environmental social governance, ESG, is really big from an investment standpoint and really big for companies overall. It started in the investment community, and it really started in Europe with a lot of the European investors really heavily weighted to environment, wanting to make sure that companies were doing the right thing for the environment. ESG took off, and I'll start by saying a couple of things. One, we were already doing a lot of the things that investors wanted us to do at NI. We just were humble about it. We weren't talking about it. So we spend a lot of time in our community across the globe, not just in Austin at our headquarters, but investing our time and resources to give back to the community. We were doing good things for the environment. Governance was more about what are we doing from a board standpoint, and diversity. Diversity became really important. So I spend a lot of time in the fall speaking with investors, but all we do is talk about ESG. We don't even talk about the financial or the strategy. We talk about these things that investors, and we also believe, are things that a company should do to become more sustainable in the market. It's not just the right thing to do, but it makes you a stronger business. So things that I'll highlight from us is we have a corporate impact strategy. It's on our website. I encourage you to go take a look at it. It really talks to the fundamentals of what's important to NI as a business in this particular area. We spend a lot of our time and investment. When I say time, I mean, we literally allow employees to take days off to go give back to the community and spend their time in the community. We give back money. We give technology and resources. There's lots of different ways that we do this, but our biggest focus is, as an engineering company, we want more diverse spaces in the engineering community. We think the more diverse the engineers are, the better outcome we have as a business when we're trying to solve these, technical and innovation challenges. So that's our first tier. The other is equity, and being equal in terms of pay or career advancement and things of this nature at NI was really important. As a woman myself, I want to work for a company where I do have a long-term career and opportunity. I didn't want to just see that it was, one particular, I'll be honest, a lot of technology companies at the start were a lot of white males. That's not the case anymore at NI or many of the other technology companies. That's very important. So diversity, we have a whole team devoted to how do we have more diverse employees, more diverse leaders at the company. And I will say we've made great strides with that in the short term. The biggest area that investors were really critical about was boards. And that was board. When you are a public company, you have a board of directors, and they are really the bosses of my boss. So there's the CEO running the company, but the board is really the ones that we have to get approval for a lot of the things that we do as a business. What happened was a lot of boards weren't diverse, and it wasn't just NI, it was many, many boards out there. So what I saw and really appreciated from the investment community, again, an institution like a William Blair invests in NI, but they have lots of clients that they're managing money for many, many clients. So those clients have a voice to the institution. The institution then uses that voice with a company like NI. What we were hearing was, one, we want more diversity on boards. And we had a really short amount of time to make sure we had more women or people of color, or even just more diverse skill sets. They were really interested in what's the matrix of your board? Is it all engineers? As a company like NI, who went from sitting founder in 2017 to a new leader, Alec Davern, who actually teaches a course at UT, was the CFO. We worked together many, many years. He became the CEO. And then in 2020, it was Eric Starkloff, who's the CEO today. So a lot of transformation of the business. The board wanted to make sure that we had experience on the board. Sorry, investors wanted to make sure we had experience on the board to handle that type of transformation. Did we have individuals who really understood our software? Did we have individuals who really understood marketing or financial impact of a transformation of the business? So that's how the investment community, and why they're so critical, and why the investor role is so important, because listening to investors and what they're concerned about it is my role to elevate that up to leadership. And a lot of the changes from an ESG standpoint, or even elevating what we were already doing from a social responsibility, became really important because of the voice of investors. So we pride ourselves on really caring about our community, really, again, caring about the pipeline of engineers, making sure we get more women interested in engineering, starting from, high school age. We have a lot of nonprofits that we invest money and technology with, but making sure that they really map to the important structure and pillars that the company is invested in. And then the environment is another one of those, making sure that we're leaving a healthy footprint in the environment with our shipping, right? This is something we talk to investors about, as well as what we're doing with our technology and highlighting who are the customers out there using our technology that are doing good for the environment. We can't do it alone. So really highlighting customers is really important in that arena as well.
Super. Okay. Well, we've got a lot of questions flooding
I
in.
see that.
You actually answered some of them in your most recent set of comments. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to be sure to ask you. Well, I think the last thing would just be, what is the value of a background? A lot of our audience, we have a lot of international business students today with us. And so I'm sure we're all curious to know what do you think the value of a background in international business would be to somebody who's coming into the field of IR? And then, what other kinds of courses might students take to prepare for that kind of career?
Right. Well, as I said earlier, I think having a global business background gets you that foot forward and really understanding any global business. Again, I had to learn that on the job. And I was also very different when I started many, many years ago. We've grown to be a larger footprint globally. But I think understanding the cultures, understanding the trends, spending time in some of the regions, I think is great experience to bring when you're interviewing for jobs, to say that you spent some time in one of the regions and really understood the culture and the business and the customers, I think is a huge advantage in a role like mine. I'll also say that global business experience, what's great about investor relations, I chose to stay in investor relations because I think it really is the best fit for me. But investor relations can also be a launch off for other roles across the company. So because I'm understanding so much about the business, because I have those strong relationships with key leaders, because I understand the market and the trends, all of these things that I've talked about, that is such unique knowledge that you can move around within the business as well. So I think that's where that global experience becomes an advantage. Other courses that I believe, I always think about what makes a strong investor relations program, what makes a strong investor relations officer. The global business is key, but it's also understanding the financials. How do you read a cash flow statement? How do you read a balance sheet? Understanding the key metrics that investors are find the priority for a business. Understanding the fundamentals of finance is very, very important. As much as I say investors can go and read the finances, you still need to be able to have a credible conversation about the financial performance. And then communications is key. And I think that's can be said for many roles within a business, but even more so in investor relations. Think about what I have to do every day. I am on either an in-person meeting at a conference or non-deal roadshow, or I'm on a Zoom call, or I'm on a phone call with an investor. All of that is communication. All of that is being armed with not knowing what question you're going to be asked and being able to answer confidently and transparently on what's going on with the business. When we talk about our earnings call or our investor conference, I do a lot of writing. I'm creating that message and creating that narrative that we want to share with the audience at that time. What a critical role that I literally write our earnings call script and tell our CEO and our CFO what they need to be saying and write in their voice for them. We have prepared remarks. Every earnings call from a public company, the leadership, it's the CEO, the CFO, and the IR officer do prepared remarks. We read what we call a script for the first 10 minutes. It's basically, these are the things we want you to understand. And then it's all the preparation for questions that are, going to come through from that audience. So a lot of writing and communication, interpersonal skills, writing skills are really critical and important. I'll write a shareholder letter from our CEO every year. The part that I want you guys to understand for investor relations, it's alleviating time from the CEO and the CFO. They don't have time to be writing their own shareholder letter. They don't have time to be writing the script. They don't have time to be talking to every single investor that comes through. They talk to the top investors, but these newer investors that don't know anything about NI, I'm the front lines to, again, selling the business and making sure they understand what we do. A lot of what I'm doing on this call. But I feel like those are the three probably biggest pillars of success is understanding regions, understanding finances of a business, and then how strongly can you communicate? How do you show up when you're on those calls or in those meetings?
Super. Wow. Okay. Thank you. You
Mhm.
answered a bunch of questions there. So here's one from Excel that I especially like. Can you elaborate more on how your explanation of NI changes when you're working with investors from different industries? How does the story change when you're talking with investors who have different goals?
Good question. Every investor, so I feel like I spend a lot of time building relationships, and that's something I want to make sure I don't think I've discussed yet. It's having those internal relationships and having the external relationships. The more I get to know investors, the more I get to know our sell side financial analysts, the more I know exactly what questions they're going to ask and where they're more focused on the business. For example, our Susquehanna sell side analyst loves to talk about 5G. So anytime I get on the phone with him, I know that 80% of the call is going to be about 5G. I have investors who really, they're hedging their bets on this EV and transportation, and they're investing in companies that they think are going to be leaders. Those investors, when I get on the phone, I know that they're going to want to talk all about the M&A that we did in transportation, in EV. So the story changes the more I know the individual person I'm talking to and what their niche is, or where they're going to want to focus the majority of their time. From a message standpoint, again, taking it away from the individual and making it more about the overall corporate experience and narrative. Again, it's what are the headwinds? Supply chain was an issue. Pandemic was an issue. We knew that investors were going to want to talk about those two things when we got on the phone. ESG was a huge topic. This idea of diversity and women in leadership and what are you doing for your employees for career paths, we knew was going to be a really important topic. So that's how I prepare, is knowing the trends, knowing the topics of the moment for the investment community, and then how can I better identify at an individual basis what they really want to learn about. I'll also say that when we meet at conferences, it's like speed dating. Honestly, you do a presentation to every investor there. Then you sit in a room at a hotel and it's investor after investor every 30 minutes coming in to talk to you all day long. I can really tell the investors that are interested in NI because they've done their homework and they're asking really great questions, and an investor that's there just to catch intel on another company in our industry that they actually invest in, not so much NI. So reading body language, identifying people who are asking the right questions, I think is another great way to prepare.
Super, thank you. Okay, so Charlotte has a question that you might get from actually from an investor. She wants to know, how does NI navigate and adapt its supply chain strategies to effectively operate in international markets? And so she's asking also, how do these considerations impact the company's investor relations and long-term growth prospects?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. Actually, one that I do have to answer to investors when supply chain was an issue. We had a shift in strategy. And so I'll talk a little bit about this to kind of lay the grand space. The broad-based business, they would buy one product, one piece of software. We were leveraging our website for a lot of those transactions. Over time, we started selling full systems. So our customers loved the technology. They loved NI as a partner, but they didn't have the time or the resources anymore to build the system on their own. So they wanted us to create the system for them and get them that much further in their test The end all goal is to get to market faster. That's what these customers are trying to do. So when supply chain became an issue, we found that our inventory was maybe geared more towards the transactional business and not geared as much towards having on the shelf what we needed for the systems. When supply chain hit, a few things happened. It wasn't just us. The reason we believe it happened was things slowed down during the pandemic. We knew on the other side of the pandemic, demand was going to increase. Well, demand increased much higher and much faster than any of us were prepared for. So to get your hand on those components was really hard. So we had to shift our entire inventory and supply on the shelves to make sure that we were doing right by our customers. So we spent a whole lot more of our cash to get our hands on these components because the brokers had the upper hand. They were selling a component that maybe would have been $10 for hundreds of dollars because they knew that companies were going to pay that money. So a few things happened. We had to rethink our strategy and inventory. We started getting more products on the shelf, as many products as we could get our hands on. There was an increase in broker fees, which impacted our gross margins because we were spending a lot of our cash. So we had to explain that to investors. We had gross margins at 75%, give or take, took a hit to 70. We had to explain that we're doing right by our customers, but it's taking our cash and it's taking a hit to our financial performance. When supply chain stabilizes, as it did, those gross margins will come back up. But what was happening was we called them golden screws. We could get a full system together, but there was one component that we were waiting on. And as soon as we got that component, we could ship it to the customer. So lead times became much longer. We would be able to give, a system to a company and call it a few weeks. Well, those weeks went from 3 weeks to 6 weeks to 7 weeks. It just got longer. But the good news was we were still delivering products faster than a lot of our competition, even though it got a little bit longer. So it's that one supply chain issue impacted financial performance, our strategy, our cash, but all the while making sure that we were really focusing on, are we doing right for the customer and are we getting that technology in the hands in the customer fast enough? We were making the right decisions. It just impacted the business negatively for a short amount of time.
Wow, that's amazing. And those were fantastic insights about your business. That's really, really interesting. Let's see. Matthew wants to know how NI manages geopolitical risk and other types of risk related to political changes worldwide. I would imagine you do some robust business intelligence research for that purpose.
We do. Yes, that's what I would consider a headwind, right? When I talk about the business to investors, there's things within our control and there's things out of our control. Supply chain was out of our control. Geopolitical changes are out of our control, but they still impact the business in a negative way. Things in our control are expense management, right? When you don't have enough revenue coming in, you really have to manage your expenses and you have to make cuts somewhere. And that's how you make sure that you remain profitable, even when the revenue is taking maybe a hit. So I do spend a lot of time, managing that research and managing geopolitical. That's another example. It's different for every region. A change politically impacts the business, but we have a whole division that focuses on that. And many public companies do. We have a government relations person who is out there keeping abreast to all of the political changes. And I partner with him on a quarterly basis to make sure that I understand what's going on and what are the impacts to the business. Again, investor relations is a small team, but it's strong partnerships within the business because I can't go tell an investor a story that's going to change quarter on quarter. I call it leading the breadcrumbs. I never want to say something that's going to be incorrect or drastically different in terms of impact to the business. But you're right, those things are very important. They're regionally based. And again, we do investment in a whole team that manages that process. And then I'm an intake to all of the research that they have.
Super, thank you. So Davide has a question about communicating losses or bad news to investors. I kind of feel like you've answered that partially, but
Yeah.
it's still a very interesting question.
It is. It's again, we want to make sure that my external brand and internal brand, I take very seriously, that I'm credible, that I'm transparent, and that I'm honest. Now, I want my leadership to be that as well. So when they're talking to the CEO and the CFO, and the three of us are really the ones that talk to investors the most, we need to make sure that we're being transparent. Now, when something is not happening as we expected, or political changes are impacting, or supply chain is impacting in a negative way, we have to answer for that. We have to tell investors what happened. How are we pivoting? What are you doing to offset that challenge? And I'll also caveat by saying, investors will ask you many, many, many questions that they know you can't answer. There's a level of materiality, which is a really important word. That's why I partner with legal. Legal reviews all of our documentation to make sure that we're not sharing material news. But material news is anything deemed important for an investor who would love to have that information because they make a better stock decision. It is very important for us as a public company. Any information we share, we can't share to just one investor. It has to be disclosed, meaning it's through a news release or an SEC filing or on our website. So all investors have access to that information at the same time. So in my role, I find it really interesting, and I've gotten a lot better at it over the time, but investors are going to ask me, 30% of the questions they ask, they know I can't answer, but it doesn't mean they're not going to ask you. So that's where you have to manage that. And when, again, as I said before, when a company is performing really well, the questions are a lot easier and investors are a lot happier. When performance is taking a hit in whatever way, in our control or out of our control, that's where questions become a little bit more challenging, and they want to really get to the root of the reason or the impact. But I have to make sure I'm not oversharing information. But that's how you handle that. It's credibility and transparency.
And I would imagine, since so much of your job involves relationships, that once you have that relationship, people will know that you're doing what you can do, and it's appropriate for them to back off at this point.
That's exactly right. And that's where the communication skills come in, right? And sometimes I'm honest, we don't disclose that. It's material. Unfortunately, if you have that question, I don't have the information in front of you, you might want to look at the recent filing, right? There's different ways that you can handle that.
Sure.
One thing that we didn't talk about that I want to make sure these last few minutes we get to is, NI is being acquired by Emerson. There's a lot of information out there about the strategic review that we started in January, the announcement of Emerson in April. I will say that whole process, IR was a critical role. I was in the room with all of those discussions with a very small group of leaders. It was me, the CEO, the CFO, the senior VP of corporate development, and our legal officer. And that's it. So it was the five of us in that room really working with our advisors in this unique experience that NI had never been through before. My role became even more critical, and I earned that seat at the table because they knew I had trusting relationships with our financial analysts and our investors. My job was to have these conversations with investors, pick up the phone when they're calling. I couldn't share any information about what was going on, but I could listen. And that's what investors, they used me as their sounding board to say, here are our expectations, here are our concerns, here's what we want the board to really keep in mind in this process. And then on a daily basis, I was elevating all of that word for word commentary that I was receiving from investors directly to our leadership and directly to the board. And that went on for many, many months. And when I heard from our advisors, we had a banking advisor, we had a communications agency, we had legal advisors. I learned so much in this process. It's probably the highlight of my career and very unique experience. But what I was hearing from our advisors were, Marissa, the fact that you can get this information out of investors and share it is so unheard of in many of these situations. A lot of times they don't trust that IR professional to elevate, or they don't trust that IR professional to even have these candid conversations. And so the fact that these top holders and these sell-side analysts were trusting me, again, really helped elevate the IR position, and is one of the reasons why I've been doing it so long. I really, truly love investor relations because it's strategy, it's financial performance, it's communication. And again, it's being that trusted advisor to our key leadership but being a trusted advisor to the investment community too. And that, again, that's what gets me out of bed every day. And I really do enjoy my job.
Well, that is, this is all so fascinating, and you heard it here first, everyone. So I know that we'll all be watching what happens with this acquisition with great interest. And NI, as one of formerly National Instruments, is one of Austin's biggest, earliest, most global companies ever. And it was established quite a long time ago and has played a very, I would say, that NI has had more global professionals in Austin than even other companies that might be bigger and equally global that did not so much have that expertise here in town. In many cases had hired people overseas for it. So NI is near and dear to my heart for that reason. And I'd like to end with one last question, if you're willing.
Yeah.
And because we've had so many questions about ESG, and ESG is not the same as corporate social responsibility. Not all companies with high ESG ratings actually would have a good CSR rating if they were being rated. However, ESG is very much a concern and an interest area for investors. So this question, and you can take it in whatever direction you like, from Jack is, do you think that in the past year, many retail investors think more about ESG and are willing to invest more in ESG companies regardless of their financials and stock prices? And I think that's an interesting question.
That is, there's so much that goes into the stock price in the market. I always tell people internally, when our stock's doing great, they're saying, hey, Marissa, thanks. And it's like, I don't impact a stock on my own, right? It's all of these things that we talked about in aggregate. From an ESG standpoint, the way I view that is, if you're a retail investor, if you're an institutional investor, I feel like more and more that hold on the fiduciary duty of those individuals to influence a company to do good is really the trend. When an institution comes and says, we want more diversity on the board, we want more diversity in your leadership, we want to make sure there's equity, that you're treating your employees right, all of these things, they are using their voice to influence a business. And I think that's a huge trend and really important for any public company. The good news is we're already doing a lot of those things. We just didn't really talk about them externally. Once we put our corporate impact strategy out, investors were like, this makes complete sense. You guys have been doing this forever. ESG is also important from a recruiting standpoint. I think it's probably really of interest to this group. We understand that many individuals want to work for a company of what we call purpose, a company that's doing good in the community, a company that's doing good for the environment, a company that has career paths for many faces that you see today. All of those things are important. So we see it not only as retaining our talent, right? I've been at NI so long because I love the people. I love what we do in the community. And I feel like we're a company of purpose. And I've known that for many, many years. So a lot of our employees stay at NI for that reason. But we also use that as a recruiting tool. And we want to make sure when we're recruiting new talent that they understand we're not a business just about technology and just about the financial performance. We're a company that really cares about doing good. Eric is a fantastic leader. It starts from the top down. And again, the recruiting aspect of that, I think is, new talent is evaluating what companies they want to work for. Again, what region, what area do you want to live in? Sure, but do you want to work for a company of purpose, and one that has purpose that really maps to your interest? I think is really important and something that's not lost on NI or many other companies in the industry today.
Okay, well, thank you so much. You've answered a lot of questions, and I think we've all gained new insights. I know I have, and I can't thank you enough for joining us at this super busy time. Marissa Vidaurri, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. I know there's several of you on the call. Find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions. Would be happy to connect.